Hannibal Lecter gets all the attention, and rightly so. Fancy suits, dinner parties, cannibalism, quotable lines you can throw at people to sound cool. He's got it all. But if you're looking for someone truly broken and genuinely terrifying in a way that's less charming and more skin-crawling, Francis Dollarhyde is your guy. Known as the Tooth Fairy by the cops and the Great Red Dragon to the voices in his head, there's nothing whimsical about him. Whether you know him from 1986's Manhunter or the 2002 Red Dragon, Dolarhyde comes across as too normal while he quietly builds a shrine to his delusions and goes on slaughtering entire families on a full moon schedule. But what makes him genuinely disturbing is that all of it stems from something very human: trauma, silence, and years of unaddressed pain. He's the kind of killer who wants to be something else because being himself feels unbearable. There's something truly sad about that. In this video, we're peeling back the layers of Dolarhyde, how a neglected kid became the Great Red Dragon, and while Dolarhyde may not be as iconic as Lecter, he's arguably the more tragic and definitely the more unhinged, and he absolutely deserves more attention than he gets. Before we get into our examination of Francis Dolarhyde, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Like slipping into a warm bath.
How to Raise a Monster, the tragic, twisted backstory of Tooth Fairy, aka Francis Dolarhyde. If you're looking with the root of Francis Dolarhyde's madness, don't start with the murders. Go back, way back. Dolarhyde was born on June 14, 1938 in Springfield, Missouri, with a cleft lip and palate. So, right from day one, Francis came into the world fighting an uphill battle. His mom, Marion Dolarhyde, wanted nothing to do with him. She dumped him at an orphanage not long after he was born. His dad, Michael Trevane, wasn't much better, an alcoholic Irish musician who barely acknowledged Francis's existence until years later. And then, right after he told Marion's mom about the kid, he died in a car accident in Kansas City. After his father's death, Francis was taken into custody by Marion's mother, but Grandma didn't come with cookies and hugs. A bitter old woman with a grudge the size of Missouri, she lived in a huge family mansion that doubled as a nursing home for old folks who she, quote-unquote, cared for. She took in Francis for all the wrong reasons. She did it to spite her daughter, Marion, who had remarried a famed lawyer, Howard Vaught, and had a new family. So what does Grandma do? She used Francis like a living insuit and dragged him to Vaught's political rallies, put him on display, and made him speak in front of crowds, even though he had trouble talking. You can imagine how well that was humiliating. Vaught lost the election. Mission accomplished, Grandma. Back home, life wasn't any kinder for Francis. The abuse was constant. He grew up in that gloomy old mansion getting screamed at, humiliated, and threatened with castration every time he wet the bed, and that happened a lot. Slowly, Francis started to unravel. How much more of this heartless world could an orphaned kid take? Little wonder he started doing weird things. He began torturing animals, showing a strange kind of fascination with death and control, showing the neighborhood kids headless chickens, watching them twitch around while he played with the feathers. It gave him a kind of thrill that went way beyond curiosity, and Francis never outgrew it. Instead, it was something that stuck. His grandmother, always watching, caught on eventually. She threatened to ship him off to an orphanage again and made it clear he would be punished if he didn't behave. That night, Francis picked up a hatchet from the yard and crept into her room. What he was planning to do, or thought he was doing, who knows? He said it was to protect her, but the fact that he was holding a hatchet next to her bed says a whole lot about where his head was at by then. Things got worse when Grandma's mind began to slip. She was diagnosed with dementia and was locked up in a sanatorium. At just 9 years old, Francis ended up with his mother again, Marion, and her new husband in St. Louis. You would think things got better for poor Francis, right? Nope. That household treated him like dirt. They mocked him, hit him, and acted like he wasn't even human. Still, nobody actually helped the kid. It didn't take long for Francis to snap again. He went back to hurting animals. This time, he was caught hanging his stepsister's cat. That did it. He was sent back to the orphanage once more. So you see, Francis wasn't born a monster, but life, family, and years of cruelty molded him into one. And by the time he hit adulthood, that damage had grown teeth, literally. By the time he grew up, Francis had a new identity for himself and wasn't just Francis anymore. He latched onto a painting called The Great Red Dragon, and The Woman Clothed with the Sun by William Blake created an alternate self that he called the Great Red Dragon. Under this delusion, he murdered families based on the lunar cycle, thinking he was evolving through their deaths. Because of his obsession with Blake's paintings, along with the strange bite marks on the bodies of his victims, the FBI gave him the name Tooth Fairy. The press made it worse by turning it into a catchy name. But to Dollarhyde, that label was an insult. He saw himself as something big, something divine. Red Dragon's silent monster, role in the novel. As Francis Dollarhyde moved into his teens, things didn't exactly straighten out. The childhood trauma never really left. He kept on hurting animals, and by 17, he finally crossed a line. He broke into a woman's house. No one got hurt that time, but it was serious enough that the cops gave him a choice: either face the charges or enlist in the army. He picked option 2. Surprisingly, boot camp didn't break him. He got through basic training and was then sent to Brooke Army Hospital in San Antonio. His job there was to help out with medical training films for the Army's Medical Corps. It gave him access to something new: film, cameras, editing rooms, that whole world. And when he was posted overseas in Japan and nearby countries, he picked up film development skills, which later became his full-time gig. He learned how to process film and run production. It was also during this time that he finally got surgery to fix his cleft palate. Physically, it helped him fit in better, but deep down, the damage was already done. By 1961, Dollarhyde's grandmother, who had been locked away in a mental hospital, was released. The Army handed him a hardship discharge so that he could take care of her, so that's what he did for 9 straight years. She finally died in 1970, and once she was gone, Dollarhyde tried to settle into civilian life. He landed away at Gateway Corp, working as a production manager in their home movies division, a place that developed people's home videos. The gig paid well, gave him stability, and allowed him to work with film, something he was surprisingly good at. And it gave him access to thousands of private family films. Birthdays, pool parties, everything. On a trip to Hong Kong, Dollarhyde got a massive dragon tattoo inked across his back. He believed he was the Great Red Dragon. He also had 2 sets of dentures made. One looked normal for everyday life, the other sharp and ugly, modeled off his grandmother's dentures, specifically for his kills. Dollarhyde's killing spree began in 1980, and it wasn't random at all. After he came across William Blake's painting, The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun, he became convinced that he was meant to transform into something godlike, a powerful being. The painting completely takes over his head, and that's where his alter ego comes in. He called it the Great Red Dragon, and once that voice started talking, Francis didn't hesitate to listen. But first, he had to shed his human skin, erase the weakness, kill the version of himself that had been shamed and broken and ignored his entire life. He first shows up in Red Dragon, the debut novel in Thomas Harris's Hannibal Lecter series. He murdered 2 entire families a month apart, both on or near the full moon. Francis believed the murders were necessary for his transformation. The public thought these killings came out of nowhere, but if you read between the lines of the novel, it's pretty clear he had killed before. He just got better at covering his tracks. His job at the film processing lab helped him pick his victims. He would watch families, perfect families, over and over, and eventually choose his target. Once picked, the dragon took over. His ritual was always the same. First, he killed the family pet, then he broke into the house while they slept. He shot the parents and kids, carved out their eyes, and replaced them with broken pieces of glasses. That way, he could look into their hollowed-out faces and see himself staring back. Then, he raped the mother's corpse and bit each victim with the distorted dentures. Once done, he would step outside, completely naked and dripping in blood, and stand in the moonlight, believing he was reaching his final form. Dollarhyde read the National Tatler religiously. He collected clippings about his murders, about Lecter's arrest and Will Graham's work with the FBI, the same guy who caught Hannibal Lecter years earlier and nearly died doing it. Dollarhyde saw Lecter as a god-tier figure, called himself a fan, wrote him a letter to the mental hospital hoping to link up, kill him. Lecter played along, of course. He fed Dollarhyde a hidden message in the Tatler, nudging him to go after Will Graham's family instead. Meanwhile, Graham and the FBI were getting desperate to flush Dollarhyde out. Graham baited him. He gave the Tatler an interview where he painted the killer as impotent, gay, and the product of incest, and claimed Lecter was disgusted to be compared to him for that extra sting. The article worked. Dollarhyde lost it. He grabbed Tatler reporter Freddie Lowndes and forced him to recant the whole thing on tape. He bit off Lowndes' tongue, then lit him on fire and rolled his burning body into the Tatler's parking garage, strapped to a wheelchair. At the same time, something weird was happening. Francis met Reba McLean, a blind co-worker who couldn't see his scars or disfigurement. Reba was kind to him and made him feel normal. For a while, the dragon went quiet and the killing stopped, but it didn't last for long. The dragon came back louder than ever, demanding a sacrifice, and this time it was Reba. Francis tried to fight it, and so he fled to New York and ate the Blake painting, thinking it would put an end to the red dragon. He literally chewed up the canvas, thinking that would kill the dragon, but it was futile. Back home, he saw Reba getting kissed on the cheek by Ralph Mandy, a co-worker he despised. That was enough to push him over the edge. He shot Mandy in the head, knocked Reba out with chloroform, and brought her to his house. There, he broke down. He told her he was the Red Dragon, told her he didn't want to hurt her but couldn't hold it back much longer. He set the house on fire, held a shotgun to her head, and then something broke inside him. He let her go. As far as the cops knew, Dollarhyde died in the flames, but that wasn't true. Francis had faked his death using the body of another victim, a guy named Arnold Lang. The Red Dragon had disappeared, but he wasn't done. Not yet. Francis made his way to Will Graham's house in Marathon, Florida. He snuck in and held Graham's young son, Willie, hostage. He told Will he planned to change the boy, whatever that meant. A fight broke out and Graham got his face slashed open, but before Dollarhyde could finish the job, Will's wife, Molly, showed up and emptied a gun into chest, head, done. Francis Dollarhyde died in that house, and after that, Will Graham retired from chasing monsters for good. Dollarhyde was the third and final serial killer he ever tracked, but probably the one who left the deepest scars, both outside and in. From page to screen, The Tooth Fairy in Manhunter and Red Dragon. While most people fangirl over Hannibal Lecter's fine dining habits, Dollarhyde was no less in the messed up department. Francis Dollarhyde made his screen debut in 1986's Manhunter, with Tom Noonan stepping into the role, all 6'5" of him. Right off the bat, this guy is eerie. He's lanky, pale, and gives off the kind of energy that makes people uncomfortable, even without him saying much. He won't talk unless he has to, and when he does, it feels like he's forcing the words out. He looks like he hasn't slept in weeks or made eye contact with another human since birth. Noonan's version was robotic, stiff, and ice cold. He doesn't cry, he doesn't yell, he doesn't beg for understanding. We don't get much backstory as to why he turned out the way he just is. This version feels distant, cold, and calculated. Noonan's Dollarhyde is also kept at a distance for most of the movie. You don't see him clearly until nearly halfway through, and when you do, it's in fragments. And yes, he spends a weird amount of time naked, especially during his transformation moments, but it also makes Dollarhyde feel more like a ghost than a person. Red Dragon, directed by Brett Ratner, who also did Rush Hour, came out in 2002. This time, Ralph Fiennes plays Dollarhyde, and his take on the character is totally different. It came as a surprise to us when we learned that he was the same guy who played the character of Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. The dude's got range for real. Fiennes brings emotion, pain, and a whole lot more mental spiraling to Francis. You see the cleft palate. You see him as a kid, abused and mocked by his grandmother. He doesn't come across as just a killer, but a guy who's at war with himself. You see him struggle with shame, obsession, and a desperate need to be more. He's still dangerous, still messed up, but now you get to feel it. You get why he snapped, even if you want him nowhere near your neighbor. Fiennes brings a fresh vulnerability to the role. He shows you how broken Francis really is, especially in his scenes with Reba. You see glimpses of someone who wants to stop, who wants to break the cycle, but deep down you know he won't, or can't, because the dragon won't let him. The scene where he strips down in front of the Blake painting, arms out, and then goes on to eat the painting, gives Fiennes' Dollarhyde this unhinged energy that we don't see in Manhunter. All of that is faithful to the book, and Red Dragon goes out of its way to show you the details. By the end, both films follow the same plot, more or less. Family's murdered, Will Graham gets dragged back into the game, both versions show him attacking Will Graham's family, faking his death to throw off the FBI, and then ultimately dying. But where Manhunter is brutal in its tone, Red Dragon is more emotional. Tom Noonan made Dollarhyde feel like a predator who was always calculating, always one step away from snapping. Ralph Fiennes turned him into a man who had already snapped and was trying in his own messed up way to claw his way out. But one thing doesn't change. They're both killers. However, Fiennes adds a level of pain that makes it harder to look away. You don't root for him, but you get him, at least a little. And whether it's 1986 or 2002, one thing stays consistent: this guy really likes being naked when things get weird. Tooth Fairy 2.0, TV's take on Francis Dollarhyde. By the time Hannibal Season 3 came out, fans were already used to the show being stylish, bold, and outright bizarre. So, when it introduced Francis Dollarhyde, played by Richard Armitage, it didn't go subtle. This wasn't the quiet, shy Dollarhyde from the book, or even the tragic one from the films. It followed the same arc for Francis as the book: abandoned by mother, dumped in the care of grandmother, born with cleft lip and palate, mocked constantly. Even after he got surgery later in life to fix his face, life didn't change much for Francis. One day, while sitting in a cafeteria flipping through Time magazine, something caught his eye: a feature on the Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun, a painting by William Blake. Upon seeing it, he became convinced it was calling to him. From that point on, he started changing. Armitage's Francis barely spoke, but his body said everything. He was ripped, ritualistic, and completely hypnotized by the Red Dragon. He glued fake teeth into his mouth so the bite marks would match the dragon's signature. We see him in his private world, lifting weights, studying the Blake painting, crawling on all fours in front of a mirror like he was practicing being something else. Right from the start, the show made it clear that this Dollarhyde wasn't pretending to become the dragon. He thought he already was. By the end of Season 3, you can barely tell where Francis ends and the dragon begins. He talks to the hallucination. He acts on its will. He thinks it's destiny, and when he goes off the grid, he fakes his death, goes full recluse, and plans one last act of destruction, dragging Will Graham into his spiral along the way. The Hannibal version of Dollarhyde might be the scariest yet, because he's quietly losing himself piece by piece, and you have to watch it happen right in front of your eyes. It's tragic because it feels like this version of Dollarhyde never had a shot at being anything else. How he kills. The creepiest bedtime routine you'll ever hear. Francis Dollarhyde never killed on a whim. His targets weren't random either. He watched them on their home movies, studied them carefully, and tracked their movements. He got to know them better than their neighbors did. His method wasn't impulsive. He waited until he had memorized the entire floor plan, knew which doors creaked, and which kids slept on the right side of the bed. When he had everything at the tip of his fingers, on a full moon night, he attacked the unsuspecting family who might have had the last supper of their life. He broke in late at night without waking up the family, not until it was too late. Francis never went after one person. He killed everyone in the house he had laid eyes on: mom, dad, kids, pets, everyone. And after he was done with the slaughter, he bit his victims with his dentures he had made specifically to do so. Francis would leave bite marks on his victims, thus earning him the name Tooth Fairy from the cops. He then arranged his victims with great care. Sometimes he shattered mirrors and put the shards near the victims, sometimes on eyes, so their eyes reflected back at him. He wanted them to see what he had become in their final moment. Francis's kills were never sloppy, and he never left a trace of himself behind. After he was done, he would disappear again until the next full moon. Looks that kill. What the Tooth Fairy looks like. Across every version, book, movie, and show, Francis is muscular. Dude was a serious bodybuilder. The novel even mentions that in his 40s, he still could have competed in regional bodybuilding contests. Tall, broad shoulders, all muscle, all discipline on the outside. Mentally, however, he was a fortress with no windows. He was tense, awkward, always kind of hunched in on himself like he was trying to shrink away or hold something back, afraid to take up space in the world. He avoided people, avoided women. The surgery fixed his mouth, but not the part of him that believed he was ugly and broken. He learned early that people judged him before he said a word, and that never really stopped. So he turned inwards, shut down. He spent most of his life without any kind of relationship. That changed only when he met Reba, the first woman he ever got close to, the first person to show him affection without judgment. So, even though Dollarhyde looked like a man who had put the past behind him, built a strong body, got a stable job, and even found someone who cared about him underneath, he was still the same poor kid who was just thrown into this uncaring world. He was obsessed with becoming something else and wanted to shed his human side. He wanted to become something terrifying, something that couldn't be ignored, mocked, or pitied. And every version of him on screen makes that painfully clear the second he steps into frame. Strengths, skills, and some seriously uncomfortable talents. Francis Dollarhyde is not someone you want chasing. He wasn't only tall, he was massive. He worked out constantly, partly for the body, partly for the transformation he thought was coming. You're not getting away if he grabs you. You can overpower grown men, throw them across rooms, and carry unconscious bodies without breaking a sweat. But he wasn't all muscle. As a killer, Dollarhyde's brain works in its own terrifying way. He was meticulous. He planned every step, left barely any evidence, except for teeth marks. Francis kept his day job at a film lab, which was his way of locking his targets. Dollarhyde also has a military background, which helps explain his discipline. He knows how to follow orders and stick to routines. He controls his body and his reactions. That makes him efficient. Francis could shoot with sniper-level accuracy and fight like a pro. As himself, Francis was shy, unsure, and constantly trying to hide. But when the dragon took over, he was brutal. Oh, delusional. All he wanted was to become something bigger than himself. In the end, he got what he wanted, kind of. He did become a monster. It just didn't end the way he pictured. Marvelous verdict. Francis Dollarhyde is certainly not the guy you picture when you hear the words Tooth Fairy. We didn't, because there's nothing magical or sweet about him. He's a monster with a plan who breaks into homes and slaughters families without flinching. But let me make this clear, he wasn't a cannibal like Hannibal Lecter, but yeah, pretty much equally messed up, no doubt about that. Maybe even more messed up, because unlike Lecter, Dollarhyde didn't need seasoning or Chianti to gulp down his meal after killing his victims, kids or otherwise. But you see, Francis didn't wake up one day and decide to be a killer, because who does that? Nobody's childhood aspiration is to grow up and become a cold-blooded killer. Francis was built, bit by bit, wound by wound, raised in a home that broke him, placed in a world that didn't care enough, left to rot until what came out wasn't a person anymore. In the end, Francis Dollarhyde was a broken man clinging to a delusion he thought was too real. And that almost makes you feel bad for him. Almost. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.